Joanne Wilson, and this is Positively Gotham Gal. Real, honest, and meaningful conversations with women entrepreneurs about their approach to life, business, and everything in between. Okay, so we're just going to chat.
Great.
Okay, we're going to go.
Great. Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So you grew up in LA in a half a Jewish household.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously there was a lot of food around the table.
Yes, always. Especially on the weekends.
And both your parents loved to cook, or was it one or the other, or was it, everyone was just, chipped in?
Well, so they were divorced, so it was like two very different households of two very different foods. But growing up in LA in Southern California, it was like a lot of like grilled tri-tip and like salmon and rice pilaf and asparagus and like the food that we ate. We also ordered Domino's all the time, but it wasn't like artichokes for every meal, but it was definitely like heavy on the vegetables. My mom definitely went through a cottage cheese phase. We weren't impervious to the dietary trends of Los
Yeah, what
Angeles,
happened?
but I still love cottage cheese. I cook with it, I bake with it, I eat it. There are certain ingredients that people sort of decide are cool or not and have a moment or not. And like goat cheese is one of those things, and like sun-dried tomatoes are one of those things. There's certain ingredients that are just sort of deemed passé. I don't know by who, because it's just an ingredient. And I feel like, there's value in it forever. But yeah, cottage cheese really had a moment. I think because it's effectively ricotta that people felt okay about eating for breakfast. I mean, I feel great about eating ricotta for breakfast too, but I think it was the
Yeah,
2%,
I
the
eat
low
ricotta
fat.
for breakfast, but I mean, growing up, it was like a food when you're on a diet. Although I do
Exactly.
put it in my kugel. So,
Yeah. And also it's like
yeah.
I've looked into it, and now that there's there's sort of a cottage cheese renaissance, and now people are making full fat cottage cheese, which is unbelievable. It's like if you grew up only eating low fat yogurt and then had full fat yogurt for the first time, it's a different universe. It is, I cannot recommend it highly enough.
A complete epiphany.
Yeah.
So, you left school, right? You dropped out of college to get into your love of food and eating and writing. Why Brooklyn?
Why not Brooklyn? I was never meant to stay in New York. I grew up in Los Angeles. I lived in Santa Cruz. I lived in San Francisco for 4 years, and I was in between jobs. I was waiting to open up a bakery, and I thought, okay, well, I'll move to New York for 3 months. I'll kill time in New York because I don't have to be in California during this time. And also, I sort of thought, well, if not now, then when? Because obviously I was born in California, I'm gonna die in California. It is the only place for me. And about a month and a half into being in New York, I was like, I think I gotta just do it. I think I gotta move here. Because if not now, when? It was sort of like the same argument of like, well, I'm not gonna move back to California and then move back to New York. I'm already here. I should, make one final trip out west, put my things in storage, sell them, get rid of my apartment, whatever, um, and see if this works. And it really worked.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously did. And you worked in so many kitchens. You worked in Sona, Quince, Milk Bar, Pies and
Hmm.
Thighs, and then you know what was the whole thought process in like, okay, I've done all these things in the land of food inside these restaurants. Now what's next? Or was it more just something that popped into your box and said, "Oh my God, Allison, you should come work for us"?
Oh my God, no, I wish it were that easy. I sort of did like the backwards trajectory of restaurants. I started working at like really high end, fine dining, tasting menu style restaurants. And I was doing pastry there at the time, bread baking, desserts, things like that. In these like really intense, high pressured kitchens, small teams, intense hours, like a lot of yelling. No, I mean, I kind of enjoyed that environment. I mean, it was never personal. I liked the intensity of it, but it did take a toll on me
Yeah.
physically and emotionally. And then when I moved to New York, was like, okay, I'm not going to work in restaurants anymore. So I took a job working for Christina Tosi, doing stuff at Milk Bar and like menu development and helping her with cookbook stuff. And I really liked that part of things. And I liked how it wasn't a restaurant, but I was still making food. And then eventually left that job because it was sort of like another intense full-time job that took a lot of
Yes.
my emotional and mental energy when I was like, okay, I'm moving to New York to like find myself, to find this new career, to find this new rhythm, and sort of found myself back there again. And so I was working at Pines and Thighs part time because I was friends with the owner and she let me just make biscuits all day, which was basically like being on vacation. And it gave me the space to kind of like refigure, okay, do I ever want to open my own restaurant? Do I ever want to work for someone else again? Do I want to work in a restaurant? Do I want to go back to fine dining? Do I want to like, what did I really want to do? I had sort of seen the spectrum of restaurants at that point. And the answer was no. I did not want to open my own restaurant. I did not want to work for somebody else. And I had gone to school for writing, and that was sort of my interest growing up. I was always writing, 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 writing. And, but never in my life thought that that would make its way into something that I could translate to doing for a living. I sometimes still cannot believe that that's how I make a living is by writing, um, because I've always just sort of identified with being a
Which is
cook.
pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. So you end up at Bon Appetit, correct?
So I put the word out to some friends that I had made along the way of just sort of like what would be like if you hear of any job, literally any job, I don't care what it is. Is it an assistant? Is it a caterer? Is it a, freelancer? Is it a photographer's assistant? Is it a, whatever? Like I did some weird odd and end jobs during that period, but I was eventually introduced to the food editor at the time at Bon Appetit when they had just sort of like relaunched the new magazine and interviewed for a job at or inside the test kitchen. And I didn't really have any experience like in a test kitchen, and I certainly didn't have any magazine or editorial experience. But I didn't lie. I just said that I had experience recipe testing because I did. I mean, I tested recipes for the Milk Bar cookbook,
Of
and I
course
feel
you did.
like, yeah, testing
Yes.
recipes, every day in a kitchen, like that's effectively what you're doing. You're coming up with new dishes. You're inventing things. You are testing things out. So I was like, yeah, of course I know how to test a recipe. And there was a bit of a learning curve, but I caught on, and um, it was really challenging and really wonderful. And I kind of saw in there that there would be a world in which I could cook and write at the same time, sort of like merging these two things that I'd always wanted to do together without sacrificing the other one. I didn't know if it would work or if I would be good at it, but I was like, well, that's a possibility, and I would like to do that.
Right. Well, so how do you think food contributes to culture, right? So what has it meant to you to be a recipe developer, but at the same time, a writer, and now, of course, a cultural figure?
um, yeah, I mean, it's great. I feel like I realized that I didn't have to choose to be a cook or a writer, that I could be both. And so I think that like I don't really write about the culture. I write about the experience of cooking, the experience of eating, the experience of preparing food, of shopping for it, of cooking it, of cleaning up after it, of sharing it. That to me is like a part of any culture, really. No matter where you live, everybody eats dinner at least, you know, together with somebody else maybe once a week. I don't know,
Once,
but yeah, once a day.
yeah.
Somebody's eating something once a day, and I think that that is a human experience, and that we can kind of all like agree can be as utilitarian or as poetic as we want it to be. And I know a lot of people that are like, I need food to survive. I need food to live. It is fuel, no more, no less. And those are not my people. I don't really spend time with those people, but you know, I prefer to like take the poetic route of just using it as a way to, I don't know, occupy ourselves, to entertain ourselves, to enrich our lives. I think that like increasingly in a culture that is obsessed with technology, doing something that is inherently a little bit I don't know what the word is, but what's the opposite of technology? I mean, it requires
Well,
none of
you're really connected to our basic levels,
yeah.
our basic needs. Our basic needs is to food, but we should enjoy and savor what we eat.
Yeah, and it's primal and
At least I
it's
think.
sort of yeah, absolutely. And I also just think that it's a nice reprieve from a lot of people that are looking at their computers all day or talking about numbers and this, that, and the other. They're like, oh, finally, I get to do something with my hands. My phone's in the other room, or like, I'm not refreshing Twitter. I am just like, have a knife in my hand and like an onion on the other hand, and I'm doing something. I have to pay attention. I have to like participate in this. You're not just ordering food. You're not, it's like you're physically making it. And that requires a level of connection to like the act that you're doing things. And I think that it is increasingly valuable to have those sorts of tasks in our lives. Remember when knitting became really popular like a few years ago? I think it's a
Yes,
similar
totally.
thing. I think
Yes.
yeah, it's like a direct reaction.
Right. I mean, you can get into, like, I got into weird stuff during COVID. I crocheted and I
Oh,
made like, literally, a quilt. I never did that before. Not sure I'll ever do that again. But there's something, and I love to cook, about the creativity and the physicality of actually creating something.
yeah. Yeah, and it says a lot about, like, where your priorities lie of just, like,
For
dedicating
sure.
yourself yeah, dedicating yourself to, like, making something, you're spending your money, you're spending your time, it's, like, not an it's an investment, and you have to wanna, like, try new things, and I don't know, there's a lot wrapped up into it, and I'm grateful if there's one thing that the pandemic did that was a positive thing, I think it really did sort of reconnect people with their kitchens and make them excited again to be cooking. And that was like if we say there was one positive cultural outcome of this whole thing, which like far and few between for sure. I'm really pushing my optimism here, but I have to say that it is people were like, I never cooked before and now I do. And even, as we enter a post-COVID world, they're prioritizing it in their lives now in the way that they never did before, which make them happier and more connected to each other, and I think that's great.
And hopefully healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's so one of the funnier things is when I publish recipes and they're like, "That's a lot of olive oil." And I'm like, "Well, trust me, it is a fraction of what's in the food that you order online. I promise you." Or like when you go to a restaurant, the food tastes so good because there's a ton of oil in it and salt and like that's how I cook, and I don't think it's because I cooked at a restaurant, I think it's because I understand, like, certain things need a lot of fat to taste good, and certain things need to be really well seasoned to taste good, um, and when people get to doing that themselves, they're like, "Well, this can't be good for you," and I was like, "It's great for you, trust me, it's definitely better than the alternative, and don't be scared of olive oil," is will be put on my tombstone.
It's so true. I mean, so our kids, my son went to school with Mario Batali's kids, and one they used to go out and we'd see them once a year. They go to the Hamptons. They had a house out there, and he came over and made steak from that he brought from La Frida, and he literally poured so much olive oil on this steak pre and post cooking it that I was like,
Yeah,
whoa, I would never
yeah,
eat like this, but it
yeah,
was
that
really
tastes
good.
good.
And that is how he cooked. You know, so it is, you don't really know what's, it tasted really good. So then you left Bon Appetit, and was New York Times just come calling, or you saw an opportunity? I mean, you were plugged into the whole universe, so it wasn't like you answered an ad in the paper.
No, I didn't know that they were hiring. Was able to I had been in touch with one of the editors there, who wanted me to write for them for a while, but I couldn't while I was at Bon Appetit. And once I left, was sort of like, hey, I'm freelance now. If you ever have an assignment, I'd love to do it. And they were like, yeah, we'd love to have you. And so I started writing for them on a freelance basis for a few years, and then eventually realized that I was sort of missing like a more permanent home somewhere in the way that I used to have at Bon Appetit. And this was before I had started doing cookbooks or anything like that. So I proposed that. Actually, that's not true. So I had just come out with Dining In. I had made that book, And then after that, I was sort of like, okay, I'm ready to be somewhere like a little bit more permanently, have like a better, a home somewhere. And so I asked if there was any possibility that they would ever consider me as a columnist. Even though they already had, like a roster of great people there. But I just figured that I wanted, instead of just writing recipes, I wanted to write the words. I wanted to, I had more to say, I guess. And I think that part of that realization was in writing that cookbook where like I love cooking and I love writing recipes, but what I really loved doing during that process was writing about food and about ingredients and about memories and about like in like a funny way, not in like a earnest way that I feel like can be tough to relate to sometimes, but just like I feel so excited about certain ingredients that like I really want to share that with you. And like I'm not selling anything. Like I don't work for Big Lemon or anything, but I do love to talk about lemons. I do love to talk about why they're so delicious when you use the whole thing and just kind of giving people like pep talk to like try something different. So I wanted that same sort of time to write for the Times as well.
And you've had these when you were at the Times, you developed some seriously viral recipes. I mean, is the cookies
Hmm.
and the stew or the chicken. And why do you think that your style resonated with so many people?
I don't know. I feel very lucky that it has, and I feel like every time it happened, I was like, "Well, this is the last time it happens." Like, like, I had never seen it happen before, so when it happened, I was like, "Well, this is a fluke." And then it would happen again, I'm like, "Well, there's no way it's gonna happen again." And then, like, the 3rd time, I was like, "Well, now people are probably really annoyed with me." Or, like, I'm, like, doing something on purpose, but, like, I wasn't, and I think that people would be like, "Oh, like, well, how do you know which recipe is gonna do the thing?" And I'm like, "I don't. I treat each one with the same amount of, like, care and affection." But I think that there's certain things like, you know, like a pie is never gonna be as popular as a cake that you can mix in one bowl. Like, there's certain barrier to entry style foods where, like, you know, I know that this is a delicious recipe that works well, and anyone who makes it will have a great time with it, but not everyone's gonna wanna make their own pie crust. Like, you just kind of know that about people. So I think that, you know, generally speaking, the recipes reflect the way that I like to cook, which is pretty lo-fi, pretty unfussy, pretty, like, pantry focused and, like, really delicious, like, really flavorful for not that many ingredients. I sort of always look at my recipes and I think, like, could I have the same amount of deliciousness with like one fewer ingredient? Like, does everything really matter in this dish? And if the answer is no, then I take it out or I figure out like how to streamline it in a way that like I'm not just adding things for the sake of it.
Right. Simple and delicious.
Yeah, it's like I'm not a chef. I don't need to like flex my skill. I am truly trying to provide a service for people. I want people to look at the recipe. I want them to say, "Oh, I could do that," or "I have half the ingredients already," or "That seems delicious and not that hard," and inspires them to actually make it. They make it, and then they're like, "Wow, I can't believe I made that." That's the life cycle of a recipe to me, and it's not to like flex some like cool technique or ingredient that you don't know about, or like make your life more complicated. Like I'm truly just trying to get you to have dinner.
Yeah, I loved it. I mean, and then in 2020, there was the controversial interview you had, which you faced like
Hmm.
cancellation. Everyone loves that word. At the height of your popularity, what was that, and what have you learned? Because certainly there's been some major time that's passed, and then COVID happened, and how was that, and how do you feel about that today?
We do not have enough time for that, unfortunately, Joanne. That is a whole nother episode, probably. It was awful. It was hell. I sometimes feel like it's not over yet, and I am still processing. Is
Wow.
the short
Yeah.
answer.
Damn. All right. All
Yeah,
right.
it
Well,
was
I'll
awful.
let
It was like it was a bad year for everybody, and more so for some.
yeah. Well, you're honest about who you are, and so perhaps that honesty about how you felt about things, there is now such a heightened reaction if it's not perceived in a way that people want it to be perceived. And that seemed to be the knee jerk reaction to, what went on, which is from someone who's been around for a lot longer than you have. I find it fascinating and a very interesting time in our culture. Some of it is certainly worthy of learning from, but some of it is crazy. That's how I look at
Yeah,
all of this
that's
stuff.
a good summation. Yeah, I am inclined to agree.
You got out and you launched a newsletter and you launched a
Mhm.
YouTube series, and you became your own boss, even though you really were your own boss all the way along. You know,
Yeah.
are you working on another cookbook? What are you doing
Yeah, I
now?
am. So it's wild to like now be sort of thrust into like being in like your own like I'm like, "Oh, am I a business owner?" Like this is weird. But I guess I am and it's my
Mm.
business. I said to my boyfriend the other day like I'm embarrassed to ask, but like how do you write a business plan? He's like, "Oh boy." Um yeah, so yeah, so I'm working on another cookbook. I am working on that YouTube channel, which I started it launched in January, so it's almost been a year, and it's been great and so fun. Like I never thought I would be like a person on YouTube. It feels like I'm too old for that. But maybe I'm not, who knows? But I think that for me, it was just like a really great way to become in control of my own narrative and my own career. And when you realize that when you work for somebody else, it's very transactional. It's a job and you're providing a service to them. And then when they decide that that doesn't serve them anymore, or it doesn't fit in the way that they want it to, or it's in the wrong voice, or, it's worth only so much to them. Like, when you are your own person, you're in charge of all that and you decide what's important to me, what are my values, and how am I going to hire people, how am I going to staff, how am I going to like run this, what am I going to prioritize, um, and that felt really exciting to me. So it sort of like lives in tandem with this newsletter that I've been doing, which has also been great, um, to keep me writing, and I feel like it's such a great exercise. It feels very low risk, high reward to do this newsletter. And the YouTube. It's like I can be myself, I can be honest, I can speak freely, I can, write about the things that I care about, which are beans, no, like cooking of any sort. And yeah, it feels great. It feels also very scary. And you're like, am I doing this right? Am I doing a good job? Do people like it? Like there's no performance review
No, there is
for
no
yourself.
interview, but
There should
there
be.
should be, but all your dots have connected, and certainly, I mean, you have been a cultural figure, and you are a cultural figure, and your cooking style has really resonated with so many people. The one thing that I like is on your Instagram, you talk a lot about personal growth, and you're very funny. I mean, you have a very funny sense of humor, and
Thank you.
I'm, curious. What does it mean to you about always pursuing personal growth? I mean, I gather it would be what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that personal growth is sort of like a small benchmark where you can like chart your own progress. And I don't know if this is just me, but I feel like growing up, I was sort of under the impression that you arrive to adulthood as like a fully formed individual where your values are set, your personality is set, your habits are set, your whatever, like everything is kind of like done and like you're cooked and like now you live your life. And what I'm realizing is that like actually the best parts of evolving as a person happen as an adult. And you're able to actually not grow but change or not change but grow. Like I think that that's sort of the thing of people being like, "Oh, well, like, can people change?" It's like, I don't know if people can change, but I think people can grow, which means that if there's areas where you're deficient or, you're like, "Oh, I'm not, like, super proud of the way that I handled that," or, like, "I don't love that I don't get out of bed until 8:30, or I should be working out, but I'm not," or, like, things that you yourself kind of know, like, could use some improvement. I shouldn't have spent that money. I shouldn't have whatever, like, things that we sort of tend to beat ourselves up over. It's really nice to know that that can be different, and it doesn't mean you change who you are. It just means that you're sort of like, oh, making more space to, like, allow yourself to behave differently.
I like that. I really like that.
Yeah, I think sometimes I use it in like a joking way, but I am very serious about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you are. And so can we talk about the rumors of you building something upstate?
Yeah, I got a place upstate. It was a house and it was a restaurant, and I'm kind of turning it back into a house. And then I am going to be opening a store down in where like the previous dining room is. I haven't talked about it yet. I don't know when this is airing, but only because it's so far away from being real, because like so much construction has to happen. It's very challenging where I am to find contractors, and like the design phase is so long, and like now with materials, it's kind of like who knows when
Great.
this will happen. But that is the plan.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah, it's
material
pretty wild.
pretty
But yeah, I was sort of tired of living on the internet. I was realizing that, especially during COVID, that people were being reduced to who they saw on the internet or on a computer screen or on their phones. And I was like, I've worked too damn hard to be reduced to like a soundbite or a headline or whatever. Like I'm a really like I like projects and I like doing things. And I realized that everything that I was doing aside from my books was just sort of this ethereal thing happening on the internet. And we became really obsessed with like Instagram and like our social media feeds and like putting content out there that didn't actually have any merit, or it kind of like you put it out and then people forget about it in 20 seconds. And I was like, I want something that feels permanent. I want something that feels like real and that you can touch and that you can see, that you can be inside of, that feels like an actual experience. And also in a world where like it's really easy to fake it on the internet. You can pretend to be a good cook. You can pretend to take nice pictures. You can pretend to have this beautiful home or this perfect family or the perfect body or the whatever. Like you can pretend to do a lot of stuff. But if you're building a physical space and like that becomes an experience that you're having, be it like a private dinner or like a shopping experience, that's
yeah.
real. And like to me, it feels like you can involve more people in the community. You can like I don't know, it just I was needing something to, like, feel not so temporary.
And bring it all
Yeah.
together. Truly bring it all together. And I remember when we in our short life in the suburbs, which was very, very, very short, going seeing people like taking these amazing vacations or having these incredible cars. And then I'd go pick my kids up at their house and I'd be like, oh my God, they have no furniture in their house. And so it was sort of, that same thing that who they were wasn't who they were.
Yes, exactly.
So, just a couple more things as you are going into this new world and you're sort of wrapping everything together, and you've had such experiences from being in a restaurant, being in, some of the major publications in food, being a voice. What are your aspirations for the industry as a whole? They're having such problems in the restaurant industry with hiring people or keeping people, and it's become more and more difficult to even make you know, get split at the end of the year that you made no money, but at least you stayed open. Like, what are your aspirations and what are you thinking about for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that from a restaurant industry perspective. And being that I haven't been in it for a long time, but I'm like a huge fan of it in general. I love going out to eat. I love restaurants. Um, I think that what we saw during COVID was like restaurant business models are so fragile. They're so delicate, and like the slightest like one bad night could be the end of it for somebody. And I think that that is not the way we should be building businesses. And I think that to to have things be that precarious is like really scary and should be scary for anyone. And I'm also hoping that we just see a bit more of like involvement with there seems to be a real disparity between the people that have the money to buy the space or to lease the space and the person with the creative vision, right? And so oftentimes what you get is a restaurateur owner who's then out to hire someone to be their chef of this restaurant. And oftentimes at first it's a lot of like, oh baby, 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 you can have whatever you want. I'll build you the kitchen of your dreams. You can do whatever menu you want. Like it's gonna be great. And then like fast forward a year and they're like, why aren't we meeting these margins? The food's too expensive. Why isn't there a steak on the menu? Like there's like a tug of war. And I think that this is one of the most common issues between like a chef and an owner, which is why you see so many people being like, I'm not gonna ever do that again. I'm gonna open my own space. I'm gonna like I'm the chef and I'm the owner. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that sometimes people that like have like, I'd love to open my own restaurant. I'm not a cook, but like I bet I could find a chef. Like the people that design the menu, that work, that hire the cooks, that like hire the dishwashers, that make the schedule, that do the ordering, that prep the food, that cook the food, I think need to be valued a little bit more. And not just financially, I think it's like a more equitable environment. And people that want their restaurant to be the best, like, have to understand that that's going to come from the person running the kitchen. Like, a great front of house person and an owner who's, agreeable and delightful to hang out with and chat with is always great. But like, to retain the people coming back, like, the food has to be great. And for the food to be great, the chef has to be happy. The cooks have to be well paid. Like, it's a real trickle down thing. And I think that for a long time, they were it felt like disposable labor almost. And like, I know that, I mean, I've been reading all these articles.
100%. I mean, in my head are thinking about, and we could sit here forever and talk about it, but how many of the restaurants survived? The majority of them were chef owned.
Yeah. Because that's how, like, they are building those
Yeah,
communities. They're like, yeah, and they're busting their ass to get people in those seats, and they're like,
for
hey,
sure.
they're like reaching out to people to come in. They're like active. You know, and they're also smaller. I feel like sometimes when somebody who's not the chef owner is like, I want like a 100 seat something something and da da da, and most people are like, that's too big of a restaurant.
Yeah. No,
Like,
I agree.
I love a small restaurant.
I love a small restaurant too. All right. So last question.
Yeah,
Best dinner party tip.
best dinner party tip. I mean, honestly, wine,
I
alcohol
knew
of
you
any sort.
were
I think starting strong. Well, it's like,
gonna
if the people are tense, if the people are like, "Oh, I don't know anyone here," or "Who are those people?" Like, uh, and I don't wanna say that you need alcohol to have a good time, and I am friends with plenty of people who abstain entirely and don't drink at all, but I'll broaden that to say, like, be prepared immediately with snacks and a beverage, because people, like, wanna immediately, like, fall into the being held. They wanna be hosted, and I feel like there's nothing worse than, like, showing up at somebody's house and, like, nothing's out, and you're like, "Are we really having dinner in an hour?" Because there's, like, not even, like, a wheel of cheese out here to snack on. But yeah, like, I think that making people feel comfortable, and whether that's a glass of wine or a strong cocktail or a cheese plate, um, introducing them to the other people that are there. I really enjoy hosting parties where not everyone knows each other, because I feel like that's when other people kind of come out of their comfort zones. It's like you pivot from like interpersonal petty gossip to like actual cool conversation, which is really nice. When it's just a bunch of people who know each other, you end up like talking shit on somebody that like nobody talks to anymore. But like, when it's people you don't know, you're like, oh, like, I actually am really interested in this thing and my partner's not. So this is a great opportunity for me to talk about it. Or you network, or like, not that it all should be, oh, wow, I can't believe I just said the word network. Dinner parties are supposed to be fun, not for networking.
But I
Um,
agree with you. I've gotten to parties where I was like, "Okay, there's no food. They're still in the kitchen, and there's no way we're eating in an hour. Like, when did you guys get home and start preparing?"
Yeah, I think it's just like making people feel comfortable. And I've done that too, where I'm like, come over at 7 and I'm in the door at 6:50, being like, oh shit, people are coming over in 10 minutes. But you just like, light a few candles, you put on a playlist, you set the vibe. And when people come in, you have to like really turn it on, I think, because if people sense that you're stressed or like feeling insecure about the energy, then they're going to be like, this is a bad scene.
Totally.
So making people feel taken care of is probably the best tip I have.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Love chatting with you, and I am sure we'll be chatting more.
I hope so. Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
All right. Take care, Allison.